Hi there ladies and gentlemen, this is Eastwood for Life fan, and this is a video of my spaghetti western collection. Now I will be doing this in a 4-part series, part 1 being my DVD editions that I've picked up from Europe and the rest of the world. Part 2 will be my Wild East DVDs. Part 3 will be my bootleg DVDs. And part 4 my Blu-rays. Now I became a spaghetti western fan as a young teen, being brought up watching the Leone Dollars trilogy movies and falling in love with the style of the Italian spaghetti westerns. And at that time I did watch the odd few Terence and Bud Spencer movies, and I actually thought that there was only around 10 to 15 of these spaghetti westerns that were made, as there were films that were quite difficult in picking up in the UK on VHS. And it wasn't only till years later that I actually realised that they made over 600 of these Italian spaghetti westerns from the early 1960s to the late 1970s. And they mainly would consist of Italian, Spanish and German actors, and these movies were released by the Italians, and now and again they would use an unknown or fading American actor as the hero, or sometimes as a villain. So we'll check my collection out, and we'll start off with the European editions, and these are all UK editions. And I suppose we've got to start the collection off with the classic movie that put the genre on the map, A Fistful of Dollars, directed by Sergio Leone. And this is the MGM UK special edition DVD pack. And even though this movie became a worldwide hit, there were around about 20 to 25 spaghetti westerns that were already made before A Fistful of Dollars, but it was Leone's unique style of western that made this genre become noticeable and very popular. But a classic spaghetti western, A Fistful of Dollars. Leone followed that up with a sequel for a few dollars more, and this time with a bigger budget. He brought Lee Van Cleef in the movie to pair up with Clint Eastwood. Another classic spaghetti western by Sergio Leone. Leone finished the trilogy off with a masterpiece in The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, with Clint Eastwood, Lee Van Cleef and Eli Wallach. And this is my personal favourite movie of all time, which I've mentioned quite a few times on my channel. And this was a beautiful ending to the trilogy. Great finale, and the soundtrack that was supplied by Ennio Morricone in all 3 of the movies made this a fitting end to 3 great spaghetti westerns, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. Leone's 4th spaghetti western is another masterpiece, Once Upon a Time in the West, with Claudia Cardinale, Henry Fonda, Jason Robards and Charles Bronson. And this is the special collector's edition. Loads of features and a great release of a true classic movie. And I would have to say that this movie, Once Upon a Time in the West, and The Good and Bad and the Ugly, kind of stand alone as the 2 supreme spaghetti westerns over all the other ones that were made. True masterpieces. Once Upon a Time in the West. I have a few Sabata movies. This is a MGM release edition, and this is the second Sabata. Adios Sabata with Yul Brynner. The original Sabata was Lee Van Cleef. It's not a bad effort with Yul Brynner. Kind of surprised he wasn't considered in any more spaghetti westerns, but this is okay. And the third in the series, Lee Van Cleef came back to the role in Return of Sabata, and this is the weakest one out of the three, as there is a circus type theme to the storyline, but probably the weakest one. And the first one with Lee Van Cleef in Sabata was by far the best one in the series. This is Vengeance Trail, below average spaghetti western with Leonard Mann and Klaus Kinski. This one is Any Gun Can Play, directed by Enzo G. Castellari, starring Ed Burns and Gilbert Roland. Fairly average spaghetti western, but there is a very good scene at the start of the movie where three actors are played to look like the Man with No Name, Tuco, and Angel Eyes, characters from The Good, Bad and the Ugly, where there was a shootout. Very interesting scene, worth checking out. Any Gun Can Play. This one's Face to Face, one of my favourite spaghetti westerns, directed by Sergio Leone, starring Thomas Milian, Gian Maria Volonte and William Berger, all familiar faces in the genre. Great movie this one, beautiful soundtrack by Ennio Morricone again. And this is the Eureka DVD edition, and it only has English subtitles, but definitely a movie to pick up and check out in Face to Face, one of the better ones. The last of my UK editions is Kioma, directed by Enzo G. Castellari, starring Franco Nero, and this is one of the last good ones, and they made this in the mid-70s. Very dark and gritty spaghetti western. Definitely worth checking this one out. By the mid-70s the genre was kind of sort of falling flat, but there were the odd few that were still good, and this is one of the better ones in the mid-70s, Kioma. I have one French edition. This is The Specialist, a late 60s spaghetti western, directed by Sergio Corbucci. And this one doesn't get talked about as much as some of his other classic movies. Very underrated, definitely worth checking out. And it stars a French actor by the name of Johnny Hallyday. Not your typical hero in a western, but good movie. And actually Johnny Hallyday later on became a French rock star, but definitely worth checking this Sergio Corbucci spaghetti western. I have one Spanish edition. This is the Five-Man Army, starring Peter Graves and Bud Spencer. Fine spaghetti western. This comes with an English audio, and I picked this one up for the main reason that this one is uncut, where the American Warner Archives version and the German version are cut, but this is the uncut one and the one to pick up for fine spaghetti western in the Five-Man Army. I have a few Italian editions, and this is God Forgives I Don't, and this is the first pairing of Terence Hill and Bud Spencer, as usually their spaghetti westerns were quite humorous, but these ones with Giuseppe Colazzi were a lot more serious, and this is probably my favourite Terence Hill and Bud Spencer spaghetti western in God Forgives I Don't. This one's Seven Guns for the McGregors, mid-60s spaghetti western with Robert Woods, another actor who made quite a few spaghetti westerns. Average spaghetti western, and this comes with an English audio. This is an early 70s movie titled Life is Tough, A Providence, and not one of Thomas Millian's better ones, as this is a silly spaghetti western. And this comes with an English audio, but I'm a fan of Thomas Millian, so it was worth picking up. Onto my German editions, and the Germans are very big fans of the genre, as they always put out great releases either on DVD or Blu-ray. This one is the sequel to A Pistol for Ringo, and this is The Return of Ringo, starring Giuliano Gemma, and this was put out by Koch Media or Cook Media, and it's a label worth checking out, as they normally put out rare spaghetti westerns, and normally they would remaster them, and a lot of their versions are very, very good additions. But Giuliano Gemma, an Italian actor, one of the big stars in the genre. Actually, I preferred this one to the original, A Pistol for Ringo, which I still need to pick up, but very good spaghetti western in The Return of Ringo. This is a Peter Lee Lawrence movie, the man who killed Billy the Kid, sometimes known as A Few Bullets More. Not checked this one out yet. But Peter Lee Lawrence was a German actor who died at a young age, and he too made quite a few spaghetti westerns, and he did have a small role in For a Few Dollars More, Peter Lee Lawrence. This one is Death Sentence, starring Robin Clark and Thomas Millian, and this version only has English subtitles, as there is no official English audio release of this movie, and worth checking out as Thomas Millian in another spaghetti western. A lot of the times the Germans would use the Django word to kind of sell these titles, but this movie is known as Death Sentence. This one is Bandidos, put out by a company, White Pearl Classics, which have been putting out a few rare spaghetti westerns, but this one is definitely worth checking out. Doesn't get talked about a lot, but very underrated and worth picking up. And this comes with an English audio. Bandidos, highly rated. This one's The Ruthless Four, sometimes known as Every Man for Himself, and this is supposed to be the best version of this movie out there, starring George Hilton, Gilbert Roland and Klaus Kinski, all familiar faces. Klaus Kinski always plays a great villain in a lot of his roles. And this one's a fine release of the first two Stranger movies starring Tony Anthony. And this contains the first two movies, A Stranger in Town and The Stranger Returns. Two very, very good spaghetti westerns, highly enjoyable. And Tony Anthony might not play your typical hero in a western, as he is a little small in stature, but that's what made these films worthwhile in watching, because it looks like he was up against the odds the whole time. But two fine spaghetti westerns in the first two movies in the Stranger series. The third movie in the Stranger series, and this is The Silent Stranger, or sometimes known as Stranger in Japan. Tony Anthony appears in the role in the third movie, where the setting is in Japan, nowhere near as good as the first two movies. And this one is Sergio Corbucci's last spaghetti western, made in 1974. And this is the white, the yellow and the black. And this is a spaghetti western comedy with Thomas Milian, Giuliano Gemma and Eli Wallach. Should have been a lot better movie, as it's got three of the spaghetti western greats, but very average comedy spaghetti western. This is a digipack of two movies. My Name is Nobody, which is classic spaghetti western with Terence Hill and Henry Fonda, one of my favourites. And even though the other movie is being titled as Nobody's the Greatest, it's also known as The Genius, or A Genius, Two Partners and a Dupe. But the way that the Germans have titled this, it's like a sequel to My Name is Nobody, and it's two separate movies. Obviously, My Name is Nobody is the far, far better movie. This was a mid-70s spaghetti western, which was just all humour, but not a great one. But a great release. 4 discs, 2 discs for the movies and 2 discs of features. Fantastic release put out by the Germans of My Name is Nobody and A Genius, Two Partners and a Dupe. The last German edition is Jonathan of the Bears with Franco Nero, directed by Enzo G. Castellari. And this is an early 90s spaghetti western. And actually, a lot of the scenes were filmed in Russia for this movie, in Jonathan of the Bears. So that's all my European editions. As we go into my rest of the world editions, this one's a Hong Kong release, A Bullet for Sandoval, starring Ernest Borgnine and George Hilton. Very average spaghetti western. I need to upgrade this movie as the transfer is not that great. I have one Australian edition, and this is Ace High, the sequel to God Forgives I Don't, starring Terence Hill, Bud Spencer and Eli Wallach, but nowhere near as good as the original God Forgives I Don't, and not one of the better ones featuring Eli Wallach in Ace High. Now on to my US editions. The first one I have is a documentary, The Spaghetti West, an IFC original documentary, a celebration of the classic Italian westerns of the 1960s. Still pick this up in the US. I've not checked it out as it's still sealed, but definitely worth checking out. I have a few Dorado editions. This one's Gatling Gun, sometimes known as Machine Gun Killers, and this is starring Robert Woods and John Ireland. Quite a good one with Robert Woods about a missing Gatling gun. This one is Django Shoots First, starring Glenn Saxon and well-known villain Fernando Sancho. This is another Dorado release of a fairly below average spaghetti western. I have a few Timeless Media editions, and they're double features, and they contain two movies: Django Kills Silently with George Eastman and Django's Cut Price Corpses with Jeff Cameron. Below average spaghetti western. And the transfers ain't bad for these two movies of these fairly rare titles. The other Timeless Media edition is this double feature containing A Man Called Django with Anthony Stephan and Django and Sultana Showdown in the West. Probably out the two editions and four movies, this one with Anthony Stephan, I'd have to say, is probably the better one out of the four. This one's The Price of Power with Giuliano Gemma. Bit difficult to get a copy of this. This is the only release that I know that comes with an English audio, and this is a alpha digital version which I picked up on Amazon.com. A very good spaghetti western with Giuliano Gemma. This is Hate for Hate on the Archives Warner Brothers collection, starring John Ireland and Fernando Sancho. Not checked this one out yet. This is Minnesota Clay, an early 60s spaghetti western directed by Sergio Corbucci. Not a bad one. And this is the best version of this movie, starring Cameron Mitchell. Plays the aging hero who kind of loses his eyesight towards the end of the movie. A couple of MGM releases. This is The Hills Run Red, starring Henry Silva in another role as a villain. Average spaghetti western, and this has got a nice score by Ennio Morricone in The Hills Run Red. This one's A Minute to Pray, A Second to Die. Worth picking up. Enjoyed this one. Very good spaghetti western starring Alex Cord, Arthur Kennedy and Robert Ryan. Very good spaghetti western. This one is Today We Kill, Tomorrow We Die, starring Brett Halsey, who went under the name of Montgomery Ford. Also Bud Spencer and William Berger are in this movie. Fairly average. This is a Code Red release, Vengeance, a movie directed by Antonio Margheriti, starring Richard Harrison, and this is probably my favourite Richard Harrison spaghetti western. Very good and enjoyable spaghetti western, this one. And actually, Code Red have just put their Blu-ray release of this movie, which I probably will be picking up. But fine spaghetti western in Vengeance. This one is Blind Man, a classic, and definitely a spaghetti western worth picking up. starring Tony Anthony in probably his best spaghetti western that he ever made, and Ringo Starr out of the Beatles in this movie as well. And he had a great role in this movie, Ringo Starr. But this has a very unique story of Tony Anthony playing a blind bounty hunter who has to escort 50 women, and definitely worth picking up, must have in Blind Man. I have a few Anchor Bay releases. This is the Hellbenders, directed by Sergio Leone. Very, very underrated and great spaghetti western, starring Joseph Cotton in a fantastic role about a coffin full of money. Great Sergio Leone movie, and this definitely needs a Blu-ray upgrade in the Hellbenders. Fine spaghetti western. This is a mid-70s spaghetti western directed by Lucio Fulci, Four of the Apocalypse, starring Fabio Testi and Thomas Milian. Again, one of the last good ones in the 70s, as the genre was kind of ending at that time. This is Take a Hard Ride, another Antonio Margheriti movie, starring Lee Van Cleef, Jim Brown and Fred Williamson. This is more of a blaxploitation movie. Still picked this up in the US on the Anchor Bay label. Not one of Lee Van Cleef's better ones, but still worth picking up. Highly enjoyable. And this is the Django DVD double feature pack containing the original Django movie with Franco Nero, directed by Sergio Leone, and also the sequel, which they made some 20 years later in Django Strikes Again. Great addition. It's always good to pick up the rare ones, as Django Strikes Again is pretty rare in picking up in an English audio version, but nowhere near as good as the original Django movie. But a great release by Anchor Bay. A few Blue Underground titles, and this is Texas Adios, mid-60s spaghetti western starring Franco Nero. Worth picking up, not as good as some of his more popular ones. This was directed by Fernandinho Boldi. This is Run Man Run, the sequel to The Big Gun Down, directed by Sergio Salima, starring Thomas Milian. Very good spaghetti western in Run Man Run. And the last of the Blue Underground titles, this is Menager, A Man Called Blade, a late 70s spaghetti western directed by Sergio Martino and starring Maurizio Merli, who made his name in a lot of the action movies, mainly in the Euro crime genre. This was his only spaghetti western. Very dark and violent, and definitely worth picking up. Highly enjoyable and highly recommended. The Menager, A Man Called Blade. There is a German Blu-ray release of this movie, but that version is cut, which is why I've still kept the Blue Underground DVD edition of this movie. Great spaghetti western. And this is an edition put out by Retrovision of Boot Hill, the third in this series, directed by Giuseppe Colazzi, who made God Forgives I Don't and Ace High. And again, Terence Hill, Bud Spencer are in this movie, but Boot Hill probably the worst one out of the three. But great transfer of Boot Hill. Probably this edition put out by Retrovision is the best one out there. And also in this double feature, there's Django the Bastard, or sometimes known as The Stranger's Gundown, starring Anthony Stephan. Another great transfer. And out of the two movies, Django the Bastard is the better movie. Probably one of Anthony Stephan's better spaghetti westerns. Gothic type feel to the movie, but great release of two spaghetti westerns that normally have bad transfers in the editions put out before, in Boot Hill and Django the Bastard. And I will end this video on The Great Silence, directed by Sergio Corbucci, starring Klaus Kinski. And this is a great spaghetti western about bounty hunters. Great setting, as they made this spaghetti western in the snow, which was probably, this movie influenced The Hateful Eight, but fine spaghetti western. And this badly needs a Blu-ray upgrade. Rumours of a release in German and French, but I am hoping that they have an English audio release of this great spaghetti western in The Great Silence. So another one definitely worth picking up and checking out. So that is part one of my spaghetti western collection, my DVD editions. So if anybody has any comments, please comment on some of your favourite spaghetti westerns, and if there's any editions that you're looking out for, please comment. Always cool to hear from you guys. Until the next video, and part 2 will contain my Wild East DVDs. So take care guys, stay healthy and keep on collecting.